Let's talk about one thing that struck me as I was doing interviews at the beginning. So, a couple, I guess, when this pandemic had hit, they shut down all the theaters here, and there were a bunch of shows. It was one of those weekends. I think there were 7 shows opening, and several of them shut down before they open. And I started interviewing several artists, and we have some Broadway people living here in the Triangle, and they were comparing this event to 9/11. And I guess from your vantage point, having lived through what you did, getting stranded in Grander for those 4 or 5 days, um, is it like 9/11? I feel like there's similarities, but it's not the same.
Right. There are a lot of similarities. The horror, the deaths. I mean, the death toll in America will likely pass the death toll from 9/11, I believe. But you have to keep all that in perspective. There's, you know, uh, hundreds of thousands of people that die every year from smoking and cancer and other diseases. But I think, you know, a pandemic, actually I have a lot of public health experience actually. And so I've been involved in these issues in my former career as the marketing communications expert. I helped the state of Texas when there was the West Nile virus and H1N1. And so, but this is by far, it is, you know, it's truly a global moment in time that we have never seen before, with enormous ramifications impacting every part of society. I know from talking to friends in New York who did live, you know, through that horror. We were in Gander. We were fine. You know, there was no issue with our safety. It was a lot of inconvenience, but we saw the better side of humanity that day than what was happening in America, in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. And so, but just as a small example, you know, my friend was telling me that she said, well, after 9/11, it was really all the problems were contained in lower Manhattan, is where everything was shut down for months, 6 months or more. But business and life went on, and the restaurants and bars were open, and she was saying it's because we needed to go out and see other people and talk about and process all of this. And that, in fact, is what is so challenging about this time. And what I worry about too is that so many people who are living in fear, and they're isolated. And so I believe there will be a mental health crisis that will be just as big as the number of people who are actually infected with this terrible disease.
You know, I think when you have events like this, when you have a natural disaster, when you have something terrible happen, a 9/11, and now we can add pandemic, like you said, to the list, it brings out the best in people, but I do think it also brings out the worst in people. And the worst being because people are afraid, they're looking for a scapegoat. And right now, the scapegoat seems to be the entire Asian population, all the Chinese people. And depending on, you know, I kind of remember because I lived through the HIV/AIDS crisis too. And at the beginning, they were calling that the gay cancer. And so when I started hearing them referring to this as a Chinese virus, that's kind of what it was reminding me of.
Yeah.
How do we change the narrative? The people in Gander had every reason to be frightened of what and who was on those planes.
Wow.
And they weren't. So how do we turn our fear into compassion and empathy and not be looking for the scapegoats?
So I've done a lot of studying on compassion thanks to an organization called the Charter for Compassion, and people can find it at charterforcompassion.org. And they're offering some free resources and webinars right now. And part of this goes back to that we have all become so siloed. people will say, well, I have plenty of compassion for my family or for my neighborhood or my political party or my city, but I can't possibly like worry about those people. And those people could be immigrants, they could be refugees, they could be gays and lesbians, they could be Asians who were first victims of this disease. But and so as long as we keep having those silos and people can't break out of them, then we're in trouble. And so what the psychology of the compassion, which is compassion again, to engage in the suffering of others, it teaches you that you actually start with self-compassion. And that's, I think, something that's really important right now, that people who are, if you are watching the news 24/7, stop. You've got to, there's nothing that will only build up the fear and anxiety. And so I've been trying to promote several things from physicians and psychiatrists. They're much more qualified than I am, but they're saying, you've got to try to get some fresh air, limit your social media, limit your news consumption, try to get some exercise, try to eat right, don't drink too much, all these things that if you take care of yourself, then you can begin to focus on others. You can begin to focus on your family members, and then even think about, what can I do to help? What can I do to engage in the suffering? And there are so many people suffering with this. There are people who are not only, of course, the people who have contracted the disease and the people who have died and those who are mourning those who have died. And there's some scary stuff. But then there's also the people who are on the front lines, the delivery workers and the healthcare workers and the first responders and the teachers and so many people that are still taking care of us while the rest of us are back, sheltering in place. So we've got it's wonderful when we see people reaching out to help others that are even strangers, because that's the story of Newfoundland. We were all strangers, and they let us in to their community and without asking a question, and everyone was treated equally. And so I think one of the biggest things that in my experience of working on some of these public health emergencies, is to fight fear with facts. And that when you really learn what is this virus, what is it going on, go to the trusted sources, being the Centers for Disease Control, and also your local health department, the health director. Those should be the main sources you should be looking at for information. And when people do, when they know the risk, when there are ways to prevent catching this disease. It's not foolproof. I mean, I know people that have thought they were doing everything they possibly could, and they still contracted it. And they're already turning out fine. And so, so I think once you learn about it, do what you can, and then kind of let go, let God, surrender. And then also I've learned from my research that when you do an act of compassion, that you get some, especially to a random stranger, random act of kindness or act of compassion, that you get the equivalent of a runner's high, with the firing off of chemicals in your brain that makes your blood pressure go down, makes you feel full and happy. And so at a time like this, when we need some happy in our lives, this is a great time to go do some random acts of kindness, and you will feel better. I've done this for so many years with my Pay It Forward 9/11 effort, and I've seen the reactions, the responses, and I'm seeing it all over right now, and it's really beautiful.
So what are some of the acts of kindness? I feel like your book and your social media handle channel of peace really has become a harbor for kindness. So when people are doing kind things, you get tagged on it, I think, at this point. So what kind of acts of kindness are you seeing? I mean, we're seeing it on the news with people standing on their balconies, clapping for the first responders, sharing songs from their balconies, doing, I saw yesterday somebody leading a bingo game from the ground for some residents of a nursing home. So what are you seeing from what you're seeing in New York, what you're seeing other places?
Well, it's just it's everywhere, I think, and that it's people sharing. It's people, maybe I've now seen some people who were the ones who were super afraid, and they went and got all the toilet paper, and now they're realizing that or maybe those N95 masks, and so they're realizing they need to hand it over. We need to share. And a good friend of mine is a professor at San Diego State, and he ran a biology lab where they do research on birds. And he realized he had box loads of these N95 masks. And he said the research on the birds can wait. And so he went and donated them to the hospital. So stuff like that, you have to, what I worry a lot about is are the homeless, because now I think probably they're still getting fed, but they are isolated out in public, far in like a ghost town wherever you go. And so I hope that people might stop, and whether or not you're going to give them money or food or whatever, I think even just acknowledge their presence and asking what their name is, asking their story, ask them how they're doing. There might be something you can help them with, there might not. But I think that just one of the best, suggestions for compassion is called active listening. So I think one thing that people are doing, I know I've been part of a lot of it, is just reaching out to people, ask them how they are, and ask them, how they're coping. And then to active listening means you don't have to give them any advice. It's probably better if you don't give any advice, but just truly listen and don't get distracted from your phone, and but to listen to what people are saying and find ways to just let people talk about what they're afraid of, what they're how they're coping, and then they'll feel better, and then you can feel better too, just because you've listened.
I totally agree. I think listening and letting people know they're not alone, which leads me to your new initiative. You're always thinking of ways to connect people and to spread kindness and compassion. So talk about your candle initiative.
Yeah, so this came to me, they're in the prayer song of Come From Away. The actor sings, "Make me a channel of your peace." It's the prayer of St. Francis. And that is a true story. That song did go through my head in the days after 9/11. As you'll read about in the book, it actually didn't happen in Gander, it happened in France, because, and this is not included in the musical, but Kevin and I got shipped back to France. Now we were, forced from our own country, and then from Canada, we were forced to go back to France. Not what we wanted, when it seemed like World War III was about to break out. And so I honestly didn't really think much about that song, and I had forgotten that. I guess I talked to David Hein, Irene Sankoff about that song. I really to this day, when the first time I saw the musical and I heard that song, it was like someone punched me in the stomach. Like, I've never spoken about that to anybody. And now here's a guy singing it, and it really happened. And it happened in Notre Dame. So I had a flashback to Notre Dame, and that burned down last year. But anyway, in that song in the prayer of St. Francis is the line, "Where there is darkness, light." And so, what can we are in a dark time. So I thought, what can I do? There are so many people, and I know some people in New York City who they're elderly, and so they've been identified as a group at risk, and so they're afraid because of that. But they're also, some of them are alone and don't have anybody, and may not even have anybody to check on them. So I thought, what can we do to let them know that we are with them and we are praying for them, and we are all together. And so I came up with this idea and a hashtag called Light Up the World. And the idea is to also, another wink to the musical, there's a great lyric called, in Newfoundland, there's a saying, there's a candle in the window and the kettle's always on. It's all about hospitality. And so my thought, I'm going to share my screen, is that what if we got all of us to light a candle and put it in our public facing window so that people could see we are in solidarity with those who are living in fear, those who are sick, those who are in isolation. And then there's an opportunity to actually, they can do this themselves. And I'm going to show you how you can make your own Light Up the World candle. And then there's a way to also give a candle to someone who is in isolation so that they can be connected and know that we are thinking about them. And maybe, just maybe, if a few people can get some relief from that, then that would be great. So here's how you do it. You can go to my website of my company, brokeringgoodness.org, and you can download this free instructions to how to make a Light Up the World candle. And so, it's basically, go find a candle in your house. This is designed for a pillar candle, but essentially if you cut out this little saying here, where there is darkness, light this candle in solidarity with all humanity, and then pay it forward, another one of my favorite things, with a neighbor, and give them a candle. And then so I've given some instructions on how, if you're willing to do this, some people might be too afraid to leave a candle at somebody's house, but you can sanitize it. But then you cut out this little flyer here, not even a flyer, just a little note saying, you are not alone. During this dark time, know there are people around the world praying for you, lighting a candle in their window. First, wipe down, and we're encouraging people to either give a flameless candle because it's safer, and then encouraging this person who's living alone to turn on the candle nightly so they can accept the prayers and the light that we're all offering. So, and then finally, if there are people who want to, they just can't get access to a candle, my company, I'm going to arrange to figure it out. Somehow we will get a candle, buy some batteries, ship them this card with the Light Up the World candle. So I'm hopeful that people will consider doing this, and I've already have a few. I just started this idea over the weekend, and so here's some examples of a friend in Mount Vernon, Washington, has her candle in the window here, and this is my brother in Nashville, Tennessee. He and his wife, Greg and Janie, they graciously did that. And then my friend Jeanette, and lives in New York City, and she has has a sign in her window thanking Amazon, DHL, FedEx, food deliveries, UPS, thanking all the people that are still working for all of us, and saying that she is staying home for Desiree, which is her niece, who is in a at-risk group because of her health. And so there's her candle in the window. So that's the idea, is
super simple. I mean, if you have kids at home and you're looking for a project, I made my candle. So I will, and I actually made two. So I have one to give to my neighbor. But this is a really good, easy DIY project for families to do together and teach their children about paying it forward, which is what I love about this project.
Make me a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring your love. Where there is injury, your pardon, Lord. And where there's doubt, true faith in you. Make me a channel of your peace. Where there's despair and life, let this Israel. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'yakol Israel. O Master, grant that I may ever seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as I love with all my soul, all my soul. Make me a child of your peace. Where there's despair and life, let me bring hope. Where there is darkness, only light. And where there's sadness, ever joy.
Kevin, I know from reading the book, you reconnected with your faith. You always were a person of faith, but you really reconnected with your faith after 9/11. From a faith standpoint, how do you make sense of an event like 9/11, a pandemic like we're going through now? How does faith help give these things meaning and definition, I guess?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are struggling with that. It's when people are randomly, their lives are taken in an instant, and when just some horrific stories of how because people are dying and they're infectious and they can't be with their loved ones on their deathbed, like I cannot fathom. And so I read, there's an article going around about how we are all in grief, whether we realize it or not. We are grieving for these people, their loved ones. We're grieving for our economy. We're grieving for, people that are, lost. They're going to lose their businesses. There is so much pain and suffering, and I know, from my faith, and having still, I've heard some really good sermons from priests. I'm a big supporter of the Jesuit fathers, and they're live streaming the mass for my church in New York, and they they said that our faith is what we have to, even if we die, that our faith is what continues us on. As a Christian, that's what I believe, and that one of my biggest takeaways I keep coming back to is that the one message that Jesus kept telling us over and over again was, "Be not afraid." And it's hard. It's hard for people. I had my own anxiety attacks, but I think that if we can, remember that and find ways to reconnect and come back to a place of love and compassion and realize what's really important in life, that hopefully we will all be restored and really all live more beautiful lives as a result.
What have you spoken or heard from any of the people, any of your friends in Gander? Because it seems like when there is a crisis, they step up to the plate, not only after 9/11, but they open their doors to refugee families more recently than 9/11. So are they, what are you hearing from Gander now?
Well, I do know that, Newfoundland, which is so remote, I really would have thought that they could have been a place that, wasn't impacted by this virus. But in fact, there were people that tested positive on the Rock. And so when that happened, they all had to go down into this same isolation mode. And, really they probably do have a lot to teach us, because they live in isolation during these horrible winters. And my friends who are there, like, they've sent me pictures where, you know, it snows so high that when they open the door, it's like they're literally trapped in their own houses. And what's beautiful is that people, they have to rely on each other. And so they just know that somebody whose house they can get out of is going to come and get their snow plow, and they will dig a hole and they will be rescued.
Mhm.
But you know, it's hard to imagine like living in like a cave basically, where you can't see out. And but they music and humor, I think, to me, that's what keeps them going. My observation